What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable, most unfiltered, and most wildly fascinating actors sits across from daytime TV, most provocative, sharp-tongued host? What happens when a simple promotional interview, something meant to be routine, light-hearted, even boring, spirals into one of the most explosive, jaw-dropping confrontations ever witnessed on live television? You're about to see Nicolas Cage like you have never seen him before. Trust me, you won't believe what comes out of his mouth. Before we dive into the chaos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell us whose side you would take, because this is about to get absolutely insane. The view attention you could feel through the screen, the View studio buzzed with a strange, electric anticipation, that morning, the kind that usually appears right before a storm breaks. The audience, the crew, even the co-hosts seemed unusually alert, as if they could sense something unpredictable brewing in the air. Nicolas Cage had just settled into the guest chair. And even in that casual moment, with the cameras still adjusting and the hosts shuffling their note cards, Cage radiated that signature intensity he's known for, the coiled energy, the unpredictable stillness, the sense that he could switch emotional gears at any moment. He was there to promote his latest high-budget psychological thriller, a dark, twisted story about obsession and redemption. But Joy Behar had no intention of sticking to the talking points. From the moment she leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting with a mixture of challenge and curiosity, the energy shifted. The other hosts seemed to sense it. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Even the audience quieted. Joy Behar was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that meant trouble. "The first strike, so, Nicolas," Joy began, her voice dripping with that familiar blend of sarcasm and forced sweetness. "I just have to ask about something that's been on everyone's minds." That was her setup. Everyone knew her style by now. She never just had to ask, unless she was about to throw a grenade. "I want to talk about your financial troubles from a few years back," she continued, cocking her head with theatrical innocence. "I mean, buying all those castles and dinosaur skulls. That was pretty irresponsible, wasn't it?" The words hit the room like a slap. The temperature seemed to drop. The audience let out a collective, uncomfortable gasp. Cage didn't move at first. He didn't blink. He just stared at Joy with a stillness so absolute it became 10 times more intimidating. Then his jaw tightened, barely, but enough that millions would catch it on replay. Still, when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, measured in a way that held back a storm. "Well, Joy," he said slowly, "I think that's a rather reductive way to look at someone's life choices." The other hosts shifted in their seats. Their smiles became tighter. They could sense where this was heading. Cage continued, "I made investments. Some worked out, some didn't. That's called being human." Gio, why doubles down, but Joy wasn't finished. She wasn't even warmed up yet. "Investments," she repeated, her eyebrows shooting up dramatically. "Most people buy a house, maybe a car, not a castle. Not a T-Rex skull." The audience laughed nervously. Cage didn't. "Well," he replied, "I've earned the right to spend my money on things that interest me. I wasn't hurting anyone, but you did hurt yourself," Joy said quickly, interrupting him. "Millions in debt, selling property. People were calling you the poster child for Hollywood excess." The word excess echoed across the room like a challenge. Cage leaned back slightly in his chair, but not in retreat, more like a wild animal adjusting its posture before deciding whether to attack. Joy laughed loudly, tossing her head back as she turned toward the audience for dramatic effect. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Is that what we're calling buying a pyramid tomb now? Artistic expression?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Come on, Nicolas. Even you have to admit some of those purchases were, well, let's be honest, downright crazy." The audience reacted with a mix of nervous laughter and awkward silence. Everyone could feel it. The atmosphere was shifting, tightening, turning into something volatile. Whoopi Goldberg's face showed visible discomfort. She shifted in her seat, leaning toward Joy as though hoping to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Joy," Whoopi said gently, "maybe we should focus on the movie. That's why he's here." But Joy wasn't having it. She raised a hand to silence Whoopi, a move that instantly added another layer of tension to the room. "No, no," Joy insisted, her voice coated with self-satisfaction. "I think people want to hear about this stuff. It's interesting, it's entertaining. She turned back to Cage with a pointed look. I mean, Nicholas, you've made some really questionable movies too. A few people in the audience sucked in their breath. They knew a line had been crossed. Joy was no longer asking questions. She was swinging elbows. Like that one where you're fighting animatronics at a pizza place. Joy continued gleefully. What was that about? Cage slowly leaned forward. Not aggressively, but with the calculated precision of someone who was done absorbing hits and was ready to strike back. His eyes, those famous, intense, unpredictable eyes, began to show that familiar fire simmering beneath the surface. You know, Joy, he said, his tone dangerously calm. I find it interesting that someone who's made a career out of sitting at a table offering opinions would critique someone who actually creates art. The studio fell into an instant, heavy silence. Even the cameramen stopped adjusting their equipment. A few exchanged uneasy glances, silently acknowledging that something monumental was unfolding. Joy's smile flickered a tiny crack in her mask before she plastered it back on, sharper than before. Art, Joy echoed with a mocking laugh. Is that what you call screaming about bees or dressing up like a bunny rabbit? She shook her head dramatically. Come on, Nicholas, let's be real. At some point, you've got to own the fact that you've made some real stinkers. Cage's jaw clenched, but he didn't back down, not even an inch. I own up to everything I've done, Cage said, his voice rising slightly. Every role, every decision, every moment of my career has been deliberate. I don't hide behind a desk making cheap shots at people who are actually out there taking risks. This time, the audience erupted in applause, real, genuine applause. Joy's face tightened. Sarah Haynes seized that moment, desperately trying to pull the show back into neutral territory. Nicholas, Sarah interjected quickly, tell us about your new film, the one where you play. Oh, let me guess. Joy interrupted, not even letting her co-host finish. She leaned forward with exaggerated interest. Another Nicolas Cage movie where Nicolas Cage plays Nicolas Cage. She shrugged dramatically. Do you ever actually act, or do you just show up and be weird? The room exploded with gasps. Even the crew froze. That was it. Everyone felt it the exact second the line was crossed. Something inside Cage shifted. It was visible in his posture. His shoulders squared, his expression sharpened, and his entire presence changed. He didn't look like a guest anymore. He looked like a storm. When he spoke, his voice dropped to an ominous whisper, the kind that chills bones more effectively than any shout. You want to know about acting, Joy? Cage asked, leaning in slowly. Let me tell you something about acting. The room fell completely silent. Cage continued, his voice low, intense, unwavering. Acting is about truth. It's about finding the raw, honest emotion in a moment and sharing it with the world, even when it exposes you, even when it makes you vulnerable, even when it costs you something. Joy rolled her eyes dramatically, a theatrical spin meant to undercut him, but it only made Cage's words feel heavier, more sincere, more cutting. But Cage pressed on, undeterred. It's about commitment. It's about stepping into a character so fully that you give something of your own soul to the performance. It's sacrifice, it's art, it's life, and it's something that most people, his eyes locked on Joy with laser precision, could never understand. The audience didn't dare react, not yet. Everyone was too stunned, too locked into the intensity radiating from Cage. Joy forced a laugh, but her confidence was cracking. She glanced toward the other hosts for support, but they looked away. No one wanted to stand between Nicolas Cage and the truth he was unleashing. Oh, please, spare me the lecture. You're not Marlon Brando, Nicholas. You're the guy who screams about stealing the Declaration of Independence. Joy's words sliced through the air like a razor, sharp, dismissive, and deliberately provocative. She leaned back in her chair with that trademark smirk, as if she had just performed a public service by cutting someone down to size. The audience tittered awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or brace for impact. For a split second, the studio lights seemed to flicker, or maybe it was just the energy in the room shifting, heavy, volatile. And you're the person, Cage shot back, his tone rising like pressure inside a boiler who thinks making jokes about other people's lives passes for entertainment. He didn't shout, but the intensity in his voice made the entire set feel charged. His eyes narrowed, and there was that unmistakable Cage intensity, something between theatrical fury and raw, authentic frustration. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in tighter, sensing a moment they wouldn't want to miss. At least when I commit to something, I commit fully, he continued, leaning slightly forward. When I take a role, I don't phone it in. I don't sit in judgment of others while contributing nothing meaningful to the world. That sentence hit like a bomb. The other hosts instantly began scrambling, their hands fluttering, their voices overlapping as they desperately tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. Anything to stop the two from verbally combusting on live television, but it was too late. The train had already derailed, contributing nothing. Joy's voice pitched higher, the insult landing squarely on her pride. She touched a hand to her chest dramatically, as though genuinely wounded. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, sweetheart. The word sweetheart dripped with sarcasm and superiority. I've interviewed presidents, she continued, lifting her chin. I've covered wars, disasters, political scandals. I've dealt with real news while you were probably still trying to figure out which relative got you into the movie business. The audience gasped, some in shock, some in fascination. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a showdown. Cage's eyes flashed, the kind of flash that signaled he was no longer simply reacting. He was ready to counterstrike. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, his expression darkening with a mix of disbelief and anger. There it is, he said slowly, almost with a bitter laugh. The real Joy Behar. When you can't win an argument with facts, you resort to personal attacks and assumptions. One of the co-hosts reached out a tentative hand toward Joy's arm, silently begging her to stop. She brushed the hand away. For your information, Cage continued, his voice gaining power and steadiness. With each word, I earned my place in this industry through years of training, dedication, and yes, taking risks that safe little talk show hosts would never dare to take. The phrase safe little talk show hosts hit the table like a sledgehammer. There was no coming back from that without blood. Safe, Joy practically shrieked, her eyebrows shooting up. She wasn't just angry, she was offended on a fundamental, personal level. You think what I do is safe? She jabbed a finger at him. Do you have any idea what it's like to face criticism every single day? To have everything you say analyzed, judged, mocked? To walk a tightrope every morning, knowing millions of people are waiting to tear you apart if you slip even once? The audience applauded that point, but it was nervous applause, and even uncertain. No one knew which side they should be on anymore. The difference, Cage said, his voice low but powerful, is that I face that criticism for creating something. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The calmness in his tone made the statement land harder. You face it, he added, rising slightly in his seat as though pulled upward by conviction, for tearing other people down. A silence fell, thick, suffocating, almost cinematic. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out immediately. She blinked. Her usual quick wit momentarily short-circuited. The hosts beside her were frozen. They knew they were witnessing a line that might be replayed on the internet for years. Joy finally found her voice, though it trembled with restrained fury. Tearing people down. You have the audacity to say that to me? I highlight hypocrisy. I expose nonsense. I question what others are too afraid to question. No, Cage replied, shaking his head. You poke horn. It nests for ratings. You ridicule people's struggles. You turn humanity into punchlines. The tension became nearly unbearable. Cameras zoomed in. Producers backstage waved frantically, and a stage manager off screen whispered urgently into a headset. The live audience couldn't look away even if they wanted to. And you, Joy said, pointing again, are a grown man who throws tantrums on set and buys dinos or bones to fill whatever void you're trying to hide. Cage laughed, a cold, humorless, hollow laugh. Better a man who takes risks, he said, than one who hides behind a desk, firing shots at people who actually put their soul on the line. Joy scoffed. Cage stared. The hosts panicked silently, and millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. The confrontation had escalated past personal jabs and wounded egos. It had become something else entirely. A raw, unfiltered clash between two people who believed fiercely that they were right, and the frightening part, neither of them looked ready to back down. Something shifted in Cage's posture, subtle at first, but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read body language. It was as if a coiled spring inside him suddenly unlatched, releasing a quiet, dangerous energy. His back straightened, his expression hardened, Even the air around him seemed to thicken with tension. When he spoke again, his voice didn't rise. It didn't grow louder. Instead, it dropped to an ominous whisper, low, precise, and powerful enough to make the entire room lean in. Somehow that whisper carried more menace, more emotional weight than any shout could have delivered. "You want to know about acting, Joy?" he said, each word sharp enough to cut through the studio noise. "Let me tell you something about acting." A hush fell across the set. Even the studio audience sensed a shift, something real, something raw. This wasn't Hollywood performance anymore. This was Nicolas Cage stepping into a space of genuine vulnerability and controlled fury. "Acting," he continued, "is about truth. Not convenience, not comedy, not cheap commentary. Truth, it's about finding the raw, honest emotion in a moment. Sometimes the darkest emotion you've ever had to face, and sharing that with the world even when it exposes the parts of you you'd rather keep hidden." His eyes were locked on Joy now, unblinking, unwavering. "It's about commitment," he said. "Commitment to a craft that demands sacrifice, intensity, and an understanding of humanity that most people, could never begin to understand." Joy rolled her eyes so dramatically the audience murmured. She made a show of leaning back, folding her arms, and giving an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, please," she said, dripping sarcasm. "Spare me the lecture. You're not Marlon Brando, Nicolas." She let his name hang in the air like an insult. "You're the guy who screams about stealing the Declaration of Independence." The audience gave a half-laugh, half-gasp. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're not sure if something is funny or wildly inappropriate. Joy smirked, proud of her jab, expecting Cage to either laugh it off or shrink back. But Nicolas Cage didn't shrink. He didn't flinch. Instead, he shot back so quickly, so sharply, that Joy barely had time to breathe. "And you're the person," he said, his voice rising with controlled venom, "who thinks making jokes about other people's lives passes for entertainment." His tone had shifted again. No longer a whisper, but not a shout either. It was a voice propelled by conviction, by frustration, by years of being misunderstood, mocked, or turned into a meme. "At least when I commit to something," he continued, leaning slightly forward, "I commit fully, completely, totally. When I take a role, I don't phone it in. I don't show up half-prepared. I don't sit on a panel judging other people while contributing nothing meaningful to the world." The words hit like punches. Clean, precise, brutal. The other hosts immediately erupted into frantic motion, trying to lighten the mood, trying to laugh it off, trying to jump in with safer, neutral filler questions. But trying to stop what was happening was like trying to stop a freight train with their bare hands. The collision had already begun, contributing nothing. Joy's voice pitched upward, now carrying a mix of anger, disbelief, and something that sounded dangerously close to insecurity. She placed a hand on her chest, almost theatrically, as if she had been personally attacked by the universe itself. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, sweetheart." The word sweetheart stung. Not because of what it meant, but because of how she said it, patronizing, dismissive, meant to cut him down to size. "I've interviewed presidents," she continued, raising her chin with pride. "I've covered wars, political scandals, social movements. I've dealt with real news, real stories, while you were probably still figuring out which relative got you into Hollywood." Her voice was sharp, bitter, and pointed. She crossed her legs and folded her arms again, signaling the finality of her attack. But Cage didn't back down. If anything, her words only ignited something deeper inside him. His eyes flashed dangerously, an expression halfway between insulted and amused, like he couldn't believe she'd taken the argument to that level. He let her words linger in the air for a moment, letting the silence thicken, letting her feel the weight of what she'd just said. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice to something steadier, colder, more piercing than before. "There it is," he said, "the real Joy Behar." The audience murmured again. That line felt personal, too personal. The kind of line that would be clipped, replayed, analyzed, and debated endlessly online. When you can't win an argument with facts, Cage continued, you resort to personal attacks, insults, assumptions. Joy's lips tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "For your information," Cage said, now speaking with the kind of intensity that made even the crew backstage stop moving, I earned my place in this industry, through training, through dedication, through years of work you will never understand, and yes, through taking risks." He paused, letting the tension stretch. Risks, he emphasized. That safe little talk. Show hosts would never dare to take. That was the line, the one that made the audience collectively inhale, the one that made Joy's eyes widen with fury, the one that changed the entire temperature of the room. Safe? Joy practically shrieked. "You think what I do is safe? You think facing the world every morning and being judged for every word, every expression, every opinion is safe?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage. "You have no idea," she said, jabbing a finger at him, "what I deal with every day." Cage didn't blink. "The difference," he said calmly, "is that I face criticism for creating something." He leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. "You face it for tearing other people down." And with that line, the studio went silent. The audience, the hosts, even Joy herself. Everyone knew something extraordinary had just happened. Something explosive, something electric, something they would never forget. And the frightening part, neither of them was close to backing down. "I've interviewed presidents," Joy snapped, her voice sharpened to a cutting edge. "I've covered wars. I've dealt with real news while you were probably still trying to figure out which relative got you into the movie business." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. The audience stirred, sensing the line had crossed from pointed to personal. Her jab wasn't just condescending, it was dismissive, belittling everything Cage had ever accomplished. Cage's eyes flashed dangerously, a fleeting glint of fury that transformed his entire face. He didn't explode, he didn't shout, he didn't even lean forward. Instead, he let the moment settle, letting the weight of her words drift between them before slicing through them with chilling precision. "There it is," he said slowly, his voice low and controlled, "the real Joy Behar." A murmur rolled through the audience like a ripple of electricity. Everyone knew this wasn't just a clap back. This was the kind of line that cut deeper than any insult. Cage spoke it with the calm of someone who had finally peeled away the last layer of pretense. "When you can't win an argument with facts," he continued, "you resort to personal attacks and assumptions, every single time." Joy opened her mouth to interject, but Cage didn't give her the chance. "For your information," he said, his words now clipped with intensity, "I earned my place in this industry, through years of training, through dedication, through showing up, day after day, committed to a craft that requires vulnerability, discipline, and relentless work." He paused, letting the silence emphasize the contrast he was about to land. "And yes, through taking risks, risks that safe little talk show hosts would never dare to take." That was the moment Joy snapped. "Safe?" she practically shrieked, her voice cracking from the effort. "You think what I do is safe? You think sitting in this chair every day, facing criticism from millions of people, getting dragged on the internet for every word I say is safe?" Cage didn't blink. He didn't break eye contact. Joy leaned forward, her palms flat on the table, her face flushed with indignation. "You have no idea," she spat, "what it's like to be analyzed, judged, attacked every single day, every joke, every opinion, every slip-up." Cage stood slightly in his chair, not rising fully, but lifting just enough that it created an unmistakable shift in dominance. His presence suddenly felt larger, more commanding, like a storm cloud forming overhead. "The difference," he said, his voice controlled but firm, "is that I face criticism for creating something." He placed a hand lightly on the table, leaning just enough to make his point crystal clear. "You face it for tearing other people down." A stunned silence swept the entire studio. Even the camera operators froze. The audience members slowly turned their heads from Cage to Joy, waiting for the inevitable explosion. "There's a world of difference," Cage continued, "between being criticized for your art and being criticized for being cruel." Joy's hand slammed against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She wasn't just angry now, she was rattled. "Cruel," she shouted. "Cruel, I'm being honest. Someone has to tell the truth about these ridiculous movies you make. Ghost Rider, really? A flaming skeleton motorcycle rider? What adult thought that was a good idea?" The audience gasped. Even the other hosts cringed. Then Cage's voice shifted. It went quiet, very quiet, quiet in a way that made every hair stand up on the back of everyone's neck. "You know what, Joy?" he said, deadly calm. "I'm beginning to understand why people change the channel when you start talking." The gasp that erupted from the audience was loud, sharp, and immediate, like a punch to the gut. Joy's face went through a rapid progression of emotions so fast it was almost cinematic. Shock, insult, outrage, vulnerability, then a snap back to bitter defiance. But something had changed. For the first time, the blow had landed. It had actually hit her. "Excuse me," she croaked, her voice cracking despite her effort to maintain authority. "Did you just insult my ratings?" She pointed at herself, incredulous. "My show has been on the air for decades. I have millions of loyal viewers who tune in specifically to hear what I have to say." Cage tilted his head slowly, studying her with the same intensity he brought to his most dramatic film roles. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper, something colder, something almost pitying. "And yet," he said, "here you are, using your platform to attack a guest instead of having a meaningful conversation." Joy breathed in sharply, but Cage kept going, each word landing like a hammer. "Tell me, Joy, when was the last time you created something, anything, that brought joy to people instead of just stirring up controversy?" Joy opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing the shift. The confidence in her voice was gone. The fire was still there, but her footing had slipped. Cage had struck at the one place she never allowed anyone to touch: her relevance. "I create conversation," Joy finally snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier force. It wavered, betraying the sting she tried so desperately to hide. But Cage didn't even respond. He didn't need to. The damage was already done.